Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into quant strategies, but, going beyond just the code, right?
Yeah, like understanding what's behind the numbers, the strategy itself.
Exactly. And we got some pretty cool sources. First, there's Q402, slides.pdf. It feels
Yeah.
like peeking into a quant course. But then we've got Q402, youtube.pdf. It's a transcript from a YouTube video, but it's in Thai.
Wow, that's a unique combination. We'll get both the theory from the course and the real-world coding practices.
Right. So let's start with the presentation, that Q402 slide.pdf. It breaks down how to develop a quant strategy. And the first thing it really focuses on is reading, like a lot of reading.
Yeah, but it says to be selective.
Yeah.
A quant strategist has to be like a researcher, always looking for new approaches. It's not about the code, it's about the idea.
So like having a deep understanding of the market and the strategies.
Exactly. And then after you have an idea, rigorous testing. Sensitivity analysis, walk-forward analysis, Monte Carlo simulations, all of it.
Intense. Why so much testing?
Well, in finance, just a hunch or like a rough calculation isn't enough. The markets are so complex. You need to test your strategy in tons of different conditions to make sure it's strong, can handle anything.
Like making sure you have a life vest before jumping in. So you're looking for weaknesses, places where it might fail.
Exactly. And the presentation says to be curious, question everything. Always try to improve, to challenge what you already know.
Never settling for good enough. That's a good rule in many fields.
Oh, yeah. It's like constantly expanding your knowledge base.
Yeah.
Different strategies, indicators, market cycles, risk management. It never ends.
So the presentation gives an example strategy, the break high strategy.
Right. And it has like 10 steps for a new strategy. First, keep the initial signal conditions simple.
Start small, even though you're thinking big. What is break high, basically?
It's all about trends. It's spot stocks, or really any asset that's making new highs. It means there might be upward momentum, ride the wave.
So buy when the price goes above a previous high, and then sell when it drops below a certain point. But how do you know where those points are?
That's where the fine-tuning is. You got to define the strategy's time frame, position size, where you put a stop loss, all the stuff that makes the strategy actually work.
So you got to manage the risk even within that trend.
For sure. And of course, all the testing we talked about before, see how it does in different market cycles, that kind of thing.
Now, this is all good in theory, but how about the real world? That's where the YouTube transcript comes in, right? Q402 youtube.pdf.
Yeah, a peek into real quant coding, even though it's all in Thai.
Now, this is interesting to me. We can't read it, but we can still, pick up stuff from the structure, the technical details they talk about.
For sure. And one thing that pops up is spit detection.
Spit detection. Okay, now that sounds a little strange. What is that all about?
So spit here means like little inconsistencies in the data, the tick data, those tiny moment-to-moment price changes.
Like data strips. That could throw off your calculations, and you're trying to find and fix them.
Exactly. It's super important for making sure your strategy is robust. Those hiccups can come from anywhere. Glitches, data delays, or even just the noise from all the high-frequency trading.
So even with all the algorithms and speed, you can't ignore the messiness of the real market.
Nope. And the transcript says, well-structured code helps a lot with this spit detection. Good coding practices make the strategy clear, so you can test and debug it easily.
Like, if your code's a mess, it's hard to find anything.
Exactly. Imagine a well-organized kitchen. If everything's in its place, labeled, it's much easier to, cook well and not make mistakes.
Love that. So even in finance, organization is key.
Oh, yeah. It's all about clarity and making sure things can handle those quirks of real-world data.
All right, let's get specific. Even though the transcript's in Thai, there's some intriguing stuff, like setting the limit trade size as a percentage of the entry bar, specifically 3%, not 10%. Why would someone choose 3% over 10%? Big difference.
Good question. It suggests they're being careful with risk. By limiting the trade size to a smaller percentage, you're reducing your exposure if things go wrong.
So finding that sweet spot. Maximizing the good, minimizing the bad.
Yeah. And choosing 3% or 10% would depend on, a lot of things. How much risk the trader's comfortable with, how volatile the market is, and the specifics of their strategy.
All about balance, huh? What else sticks out in the transcript?
This adjusted tick size thing. It's like even the tiny things matter.
What's so important about that?
It shows how real-world stuff influences strategy. The tick size is, the smallest amount the price can move. Adjusting it probably means they're taking into account stuff specific to the market, minimum price changes, fees, that kind of thing.
So it's fine-tuning to fit the reality of the market, making sure the code actually works in practice.
Exactly. And the fact that it's a big focus in the transcript means these quant programmers are super meticulous. Big picture and tiny details.
Then there's this merge market class. Sounds kind of mysterious. What do you think it means?
Hard to say for sure without more info. But probably a way of grouping markets together based on certain things. Volatility, what sector they're in, you name it. Then that would affect how the strategy is used.
So tailoring the strategy to fit different markets? Because one size fits all probably doesn't work, right?
They're really not in finance.
Yeah.
It's all about adapting to the specific market.
And this Thai transcript is giving us a peek into that, huh? The real world stuff that goes beyond just the theory in the course.
Yeah, it's like comparing a textbook to a field manual. Both are valuable, but they show you different things.
Love that. Textbook gives the basics. Field manual shows how it actually works in the trenches.
Totally. And that's what makes this so cool. We get to see both sides. Seeing the theory and practice together, it's pretty cool. And speaking of practice, there's this part in the transcript about random number generation for simulations.
Oh, right. Simulations. It's like making a fake market to test your strategy on, right? But why random numbers?
Well, simulations are super important when you're testing quant strategies. Adding randomness helps you see how the strategy does under, a bunch of different market conditions.
So you're like throwing in some unpredictability, trying to make it more like the real messy market.
Exactly. You can't predict the future perfectly, so adding those random elements makes the simulation way more realistic.
Okay, so it's not about finding something that works perfectly, but something that can survive the real world, right?
Right. And another thing they keep saying in the transcript is to make your code transparent and well-structured. It's not just about getting the right answer. It's about making sure other people can understand how you got there.
Yeah, if you can't explain it or let other people get the same results, then your findings aren't as useful. Like a scientist keeping their experiment a secret.
Exactly. Transparency and clarity are key for building trust and pushing knowledge forward in any field, really.
So good coding is about more than just efficiency. It's about being honest and collaborative, too. Kind of like what my mom always said.
Yeah.
A place for everything and everything in its place.
Yeah. Good advice for coding and for life. And talking about good coding, they mention utility functions in the transcript. Imagine building a house. A utility function is like having a pre-built window frame. You don't have to build it from scratch every time.
I like that. So you create these reusable parts for specific tasks, like having a toolbox with all the tools ready to go.
Exactly. It makes the code more modular and efficient. And they talk about naming variables clearly, organizing the code so it's easy to understand and change.
Right. You don't want to be searching through a jumbled mess trying to figure out what does what, like reading a recipe with no measurements.
Totally. Clear and concise is the way to go. Not just for you, but for anyone who might need to use your code in the future.
Now there's this line, trick data. I'm guessing that's supposed to be tick data, right? Typo.
Probably. But it reminds us that even with the best coding, you still need good data. They emphasize cleaning and preparing the tick data before using it.
Like they say, garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. A fancy algorithm is useless if you're feeding it bad data.
So data cleansing is like prepping your ingredients before cooking, right? Make sure it's fresh and good.
Exactly. And then they talk about initial equity, which might sound basic, but it's important for backtesting.
Backtesting, right. Like simulating how a strategy would have done in the past. Why is initial equity important there?
It's the starting capital you would have had, like setting the stage for your simulation, the ground rules for your fake trading.
And it makes it fair to compare different strategies.
For sure. Same initial equity for all your tests means you can really see which strategy would have been the most profitable, like a controlled experiment.
Okay, so it's about finding a strategy that beats other strategies given the same starting point. Makes sense.
And then there's buy-set market regulation.
What's that all about?
Probably about the rules and regulations that govern trading
Yeah.
in a specific market. Things like restrictions on short selling or limits on how many shares you can trade at once.
So you have to take into account the real-world limitations of the market.
Exactly. Quant strategies aren't just math. They have to be practical and follow the rules.
Like designing a super powerful car, but it can't go anywhere because it doesn't meet safety standards.
Yeah. Balance innovation with responsibility. And speaking of real-world constraints, there's a part about slippage.
Slippage. Okay, what's that?
It's the difference between the price you expect to get for a trade and the price you actually get. The market moves fast. You don't always hit your target exactly.
So it's like trying to hit a moving target, accounting for the fact that the market never stands still.
Exactly. Lots of things can cause slippage, like delays in how orders are executed, price changes between when you make the order and when it's filled, or even just big differences between the bid and ask prices.
So if you don't watch out, slippage can really eat into your profits.
It can, and they talk about using random slippage in the simulation, which is smart. It adds that bit of uncertainty, makes the backtesting more like real trading.
So you're basically admitting that there's always going to be some uncertainty, and you're building that into your models.
Exactly. Being realistic, You can't control everything. There's always some luck involved, and good quant programmers factor that in.
Kind of like the difference between chess and poker, right? In chess, you know everything. But in poker, there's luck, and you don't have all the information.
Great analogy. And like in poker, the successful quant programmers are the ones who can manage their risk and make good decisions even when they're missing information.
It sounds like quant strategy development is a mix of art and science. You need the math, but also a good feel for the market.
Definitely. It's a fascinating field that needs both.
Now, they also talk about probability of missing trades. Why is that important?
It's a key metric for any strategy. No strategy's perfect, you're going to miss some trades. Probability of missing trades tells you how often the strategy fails to get in or out at the best possible time.
So it's a measure of the strategy's limitations, a way of being realistic about what it can and can't do.
Exactly. Even the best strategies have blind spots. You're not going to catch every wave. And that's okay.
So it's not about finding a perfect strategy, but one that does well enough over time, even with some missed opportunities.
Right. And they talk about ways to adjust the tick size to try and minimize this missing trades thing, make the strategy as strong as possible.
So you can't completely get rid of the risk, but you can tweak things to make it smaller.
Yeah, it's all about optimization, finding those little adjustments that add up over time.
It's amazing how much detail goes into these strategies. It's really making me appreciate the complexity of this whole field.
It shows how skilled these quant programmers are. They need to be great with math and super meticulous, too. They're always looking for ways to improve, to get that little edge in the market.
Now, even though we can't understand the code exactly, the transcript mentions some interesting variables and stuff like buy condition, sell condition, market class, even random number.
Yeah, and you can tell they're all connected, all part of the strategy's logic. Can't decode everything. But the transcript shows how important it is to name these variables clearly and organize the code so it's easy to understand.
It's for getting a feel for how a quant programmer thinks, even if we can't read the code itself.
Right. It's like watching someone work in their workshop, seeing all the tools and techniques.
I like that, seeing how the sausage is made, even if we don't know the exact recipe.
Exactly. And it shows that even with all the technical stuff, there's still room for creativity and craftsmanship in quant programming.
There's this line, no duplication. Why is that so important?
That's a fundamental rule of good coding. Don't repeat yourself. Write each piece of logic once and then reuse it whenever you need it.
So it's about efficiency, making the code lean and clean.
Yeah. It makes the code cleaner, easier to update, and less likely to have errors. Like a well-organized closet, everything has its place, new duplicates, cluttering things up.
Makes sense. Streamlining, making the code as good as it can be.
And then there's this idea of hidden work in the code, something to watch out for with complex algorithms.
Hidden work? What's that?
It's stuff happening behind the scenes, not directly written in the main part of the program. Could be a simple math formula or a complicated data change.
Like secret ingredients in a recipe?
Yeah. And just like with secret ingredients, it's tough to copy the recipe if you don't know what those hidden things are.
Right. If you're trying to figure out how the code works and there's all this hidden stuff going on, it's going to be hard to understand.
Exactly. That's why good coding is all about being transparent. You want your code to be easy to read and understand, not full of hidden stuff.
So it's about making your code accessible, not just for yourself, but for anyone else who might need to work with it later on.
Right. It's about making sure your code can be maintained and understood by others, like writing a clear instruction manual. Anyone can follow the steps and get the right result.
Okay, so it's not just about making it work, it's about making it easy to understand and change later.
Exactly. Code that's both functional and elegant, effective and efficient.
We've talked about tick size a lot, but the transcript goes into even more detail about adjusting it. Why so much focus on such a small thing?
Remember, tick size is the smallest amount a price can move. Even tiny changes to it can have a big impact on how well a strategy performs, how much money it makes.
So it's about fine-tuning the strategy to perfectly match how the market actually works.
Exactly. And it shows how detail-oriented these programmers are. They have to think big and small at the same time, see the whole picture and the tiny details.
It's fascinating to see how much thought goes into every little part of these strategies.
It really is. It's a field that needs a lot of brain power and attention to detail, and the transcript really shows that.
Okay, let's talk about the software they're using in the video. The transcript mentions global variable in ME Broker. What does that mean?
Global variables are like, well, imagine a town crier in a medieval village. They have information everyone needs to know. In programming, a global variable is something that can be accessed from anywhere in the program, useful for storing values that need to be shared.
Like a central bulletin board where everyone can post and read information.
Yeah, but you got to be careful with global variables. Use too many, and things get messy and hard to debug, like too many cooks in the kitchen.
Right. Too many people trying to do the same thing at once.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance. What else caught your eye?
There's this line, the market may change. Seems pretty obvious, but why is it important here?
It's a reminder that quant strategies aren't set in stone. Markets change constantly. What works today might not work tomorrow.
So you got to be adaptable, ready to change with the market.
Exactly. A good strategy has to be able to handle volatility and unexpected events, like sailing a ship in a storm, always adjusting course to stay afloat.
I like that. Navigating the uncertainty, being ready for anything.
And they also talk about sensitivity analysis.
Sensitivity analysis, what's that?
It's a way to see how changing the inputs of a model affects the output. For quant strategy, it means testing how much the performance changes when you tweak things like the tick size, the stop-loss level, or the trade size.
So you're basically stress testing the strategy, seeing how it holds up under pressure.
Exactly. It helps you figure out which parts are most important for performance and how to make it better. Like a mechanic fine-tuning an engine, looking for those small changes that make a big difference.
So it's about understanding what controls the strategy and how changing one thing can affect everything else.
Yeah. It's about seeing the big picture and the small details, how everything fits together.
This is really interesting stuff. I never realized how much goes into developing these strategies.
It's a really demanding field, but also really intellectually stimulating. And this deep dive is giving us a great look into it.
Definitely. And this tight transcript, even though we can't understand all of it, is giving us a glimpse into how other programmers are approaching the same problems.
It's like a window into a different culture, a different way of thinking. Pretty cool.
Now, as we go further into the transcript, we see this focus on making the code readable and understandable, not just functional.
Right. That's a sign of good coding. The code needs to be well documented, easy to follow. It's not enough for it to just work.
So, like writing a good instruction manual, so anyone can pick it up and understand what it does and how it works.
Exactly. It makes it easier for people to work together, fix bugs, and update the code in the future. Like building a house with detailed blueprints. Anyone can see how it was built and make changes if they need to.
What if you come back to the code later and can't remember how it works?
Or what if someone else needs to understand your code? Clear, well-documented code is key for sharing knowledge.
Like speaking a universal language, the language of good code.
Totally. And this transcript really highlights that.
There's so much to quant strategy development, more than I ever thought.
It's a challenging field, but really rewarding too. And we're getting a good look at both sides of it.
I'm really enjoying this. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, always something new to discover. What else is in the transcript?
Towards the end, there's this interesting phrase, format for beauty.
Format for beauty. That's not something you hear every day, especially when you're talking about coding.
It might seem superficial, but how the code looks visually can really affect how easy it is to read and understand. Well-formatted code is easier on the eyes, and it's easier to spot errors.
So it's like the difference between a messy handwritten note and a nicely typed document.
Exactly. Good formatting makes the code much more pleasant to work with.
So even in coding, aesthetics matter. It's not just about making it work, it's about making it look good too.
For sure. And the transcript says, good formatting makes it easier to debug and maintain the code. Like a well-organized workshop, everything has its place, and you can easily find what you need.
And they also talk about using functions to organize the code and make it more reusable, right?
Yes. Functions are like mini programs within the bigger program. They let you group specific tasks and reuse them, which makes the code more efficient and easier to manage.
So it's like having a toolbox full of specialized tools that you can grab whenever you need them.
Exactly. It's all about being modular and elegant. And the transcript points out that using functions makes the code more readable, understandable, and efficient.
Okay, that makes sense. Breaking down big tasks into smaller, more manageable pieces, like building a house, you wouldn't try to do everything at once, right? You'd build the foundation, then the walls, then the roof.
Exactly. Functions let you do that with your code. Break down those complex algorithms into smaller pieces so it's easier to write, test, and fix.
Now, there's this line that caught my eye. If I want to change, I need to change everything. What's the meaning of that?
That's a powerful statement about how interconnected everything is in a quant strategy. It shows that even small changes can have big effects throughout the code.
So it's a warning about planning carefully and testing thoroughly.
Exactly. Before you change anything, you need to understand how it will affect everything else. Like changing a recipe, you don't want to ruin the whole dish by messing with one ingredient.
Right, like you don't want to break something else while trying to fix something else.
Exactly. You need to understand how all the pieces work together. It's like a finely tuned machine. One small change can throw everything off.
It's about respecting the complexity of the system and understanding that even small tweaks can have big consequences.
Absolutely. It's about being a thoughtful programmer, not just someone who throws code around and hopes for the best.
Okay, let's talk about average price. They mention it when they're talking about calculating the adjusted tick size.
Average price can be helpful for smoothing out price fluctuations and getting a more stable measure of what an asset is worth. When they're adjusting the tick size, they're probably using an average of recent prices to figure out the adjusted value.
So it's like reducing the numbers in the data, filtering out the short-term ups and downs to see the bigger trend.
Exactly. It helps make sure the strategy isn't too sensitive to those little price movements. Like looking at a stock chart with a moving average, it smooths things out so you can see the trend more clearly.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about seeing the forest for the trees.
Right. And then as we get toward the end of the transcript, you can feel this sense of satisfaction that they've made the code more readable and well-structured.
Like an artist who's taken something rough and turned it into a masterpiece.
Exactly. They took something complex and messy and made it elegant and efficient. That takes real skill.
It's inspiring to see that even in a field like quant programming, there's room for creativity and beauty.
Absolutely. And this transcript is a great example of that.
This whole deep dive into quant strategies has been really eye-opening. All this talk about spit detection and making sure your data and systems are, rock solid. But it makes me think, do these lessons apply to other fields too, like healthcare or self-driving cars?
Oh, for sure. And it's a question more and more people are asking as we rely more on data to, run things. The principles are the same, whether it's finance, healthcare, self-driving cars, you name it.
So it's not just for quant people, it's for anyone who uses data to make decisions.
Exactly. If you want to make good decisions based on data, no matter the field, you got to start by understanding the data itself. Where'd it come from? How is it collected? Are there biases, limitations? It's like checking the ingredients before you pick a cake.
Okay, so like data history matters. What else?
Data can go bad, just like ingredients. It gets old, it's incomplete, or just plain wrong. So you got to clean it, make sure it's good, before you use it to make decisions. Imagine a doctor diagnosing you based on a faulty test.
Yeah.
Or a self-driving car making decisions on bad sensor data. Things can get scary.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought. Bad data can have real consequences.
Absolutely. Data cleansing and validation are super important. And it's not a one-time thing. You got to keep checking, keep updating to make sure it stays good.
So it's not just about finding the bad stuff, but making sure it doesn't sneak back in.
Right. It needs both tech solutions and, human smarts. You need algorithms to find weird stuff, red flags, but you also need people to understand the data and make the final call.
So a team effort, humans and machines working together. What else should we keep in mind?
Biases. Data can have biases, and that's especially important in areas like healthcare or social justice. Biased data can lead to unfair or discriminatory decisions.
So how do we spot and fix those biases? It seems super tricky.
It's tough, yeah. And it usually needs people from different fields working together, data scientists and, let's say, doctors. If you're building an algorithm to predict patient outcomes, you got to make sure it's not making things worse, perpetuating existing biases.
Because the data isn't neutral, right? It reflects the biases of the people who collected it and the systems it comes from.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have different voices, different perspectives when you're building these systems.
Mm.
People from different backgrounds, different experiences, they can challenge those assumptions and help catch those blind spots.
Like having a diverse team of cooks. You're going to get a much more interesting and tasty dish with different people bringing their ideas.
Love that. Diversity makes things fair, and it sparks creativity and innovation.
Okay, so we talked about where data comes from, cleaning it, watching out for biases. What else is important for being responsible with data?
Transparency. Got to be open about the limits of your data, the uncertainties. You're not aiming for perfection, but an honest, realistic understanding.
So admit what you don't know. Be honest about where things could be wrong.
Exactly. Data-driven decisions aren't about perfect answers. They're about using the best information to make a smart choice, knowing that the data isn't perfect. There's always uncertainty, and it's good to be upfront about that.
So humility, transparency, and awareness of biases.
That's it, and it's a constant process. The data world keeps changing, so we got to keep learning and adapting.
We started with quant strategies, and now we're talking about data and society. It's pretty amazing how it all connects.
It really does. Being responsible with data matters everywhere. Finance, healthcare, social justice, all of it. And as we rely on data more and more, these issues become even more important.
Absolutely. So for our listener out there, what's the key takeaway? How can they be more data savvy in this, data-driven world?
Be curious, be skeptical, and demand better data practices.
Yeah.
Ask questions about where the data comes from, how it was collected, what biases might be there. Don't just accept it, Dig deeper, think critically, and hold people accountable for how they use data.
That's great advice. Applies to everyone no matter what they're into. We all need to be smarter about data. This has been a really insightful deep dive. Thanks for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Great conversation.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on the deep dive. See you next time.